The auctioneer's voice rang out across the dusty square in Yarrington, Nevada, on a blistering July afternoon in 1883, and Eleanor Mae Miller felt every eye in the crowd settle on her twisted right leg as she stood on the wooden platform. She had been standing there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes, listening to men bid on her future as though she were livestock being sold at market. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving debts that swallowed everything, and the bank had wasted no time claiming what they were owed. When there was nothing left to take, they had suggested this arrangement, calling it an opportunity rather than what it truly was, a last resort for a woman with no family and limited prospects. Eleanor kept her chin high, despite the humiliation burning through her chest. At 22 years old, she had survived a childhood bout of polio that left her with a permanent limp, years of whispers and pitying glances, and the recent loss of the only parent she had ever known. She would survive this too, whatever came next. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat stains spreading across his shirt, gestured toward her with theatrical flair. "Now, gentlemen, I understand Miss Miller here has a slight imperfection, but she comes with excellent references as a cook and seamstress. Starting bid is $50 for a 1-year work contract, room and board included, of course." Eleanor's stomach turned at the word imperfection, but she forced herself to remain still. The crowd murmured, men in worn hats and dusty boots exchanging glances. She recognized some faces from town storekeepers and ranch hands who had known her father. None of them met her eyes now. A few men called out lowball offers, their voices carrying more curiosity than genuine interest. Then a voice cut through the noise, strong and clear. $200. The crowd fell silent, heads turning to locate the speaker. Eleanor followed their gazes to a tall man standing at the back of the gathering. He wore a dark hat pulled low, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw and the broad set of his shoulders beneath a simple work shirt. He moved forward through the crowd, and people stepped aside to let him pass. There was something commanding in the way he walked, purposeful and unhurried. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. 200. "Well now, that is generous, Mr. Vaughn. Any other bidders?" The crowd remained quiet. Eleanor watched as Yates Vaughn, she had heard the name before, climbed the steps to the platform. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in springtime. When he looked at her, she braced herself for the assessment she had endured all afternoon, the way men's gazes would drift to her leg and then quickly away. But Yates Vaughn looked directly at her face, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Miller," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears only while the auctioneer shuffled papers. "I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here. I need help managing the house and cooking for my ranch hands. It is honest work, and I give you my word you will be treated with respect." Eleanor studied him, searching for deception or hidden intentions. She found neither, only a straightforward steadiness that was somehow more unsettling than the leering glances she had received from other bidders. "Why did you bid so much?" Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly to name. "Because I believe in paying fair value for honest work. Your leg does not change that." The auctioneer cleared his throat loudly. "All settled then. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Yates Vaughn for $200. Sign here, sir." The transaction took only minutes. Eleanor watched as money changed hands and papers were signed, legally binding her to 1 year of service on the Vaughn ranch. She felt disconnected from her body, as though she were watching this happen to someone else. When the formalities concluded, Yates turned to her again. "I have a wagon waiting. Do you have belongings to collect? "A trunk at the boarding house," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everything I own fits in one trunk." He nodded and offered his arm. She hesitated before accepting it, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve as they descended the platform steps. She was acutely aware of her uneven gait, the way she had to favor her right side, but Yates adjusted his pace without comment, matching her rhythm as naturally as breathing. It was such a small thing, yet it meant more than she cared to admit. They collected her trunk, a battered leather case that held her few dresses, her mother's Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Yates lifted it easily into the wagon bed, then helped Eleanor onto the bench seat. His hands were calloused but gentle, and he released her the moment she was settled. The ride north took them through sagebrush country, the landscape rolling out in shades of brown and gold under the relentless sun. Eleanor sat in silence, processing the sudden shift in her circumstances. This morning she had woken in a narrow boarding house bed, knowing this day would change everything but not knowing how. Now she was heading into unknown territory with a man who was technically her employer, but who had purchased the contract to her labor in a public auction like something from another century. "I should explain about the ranch," Yates said after they had been traveling for perhaps 20 minutes. His eyes stayed on the road ahead, hands relaxed on the reins. "It is not large, but it is mine. I have 4 men working for me, good men who have been with me since I started 3 years ago. They are rough around the edges but decent. I expect you to cook 3 meals a day, keep the house in order, and help with mending when needed. In return, you will have your own room, meals, and a salary of $10 a month on top of the contract payment." Eleanor turned to look at him sharply. "A salary? But you already paid for the contract." "That money went to your creditors," Yates said simply. "You should have something for yourself." She did not know what to say to that. Generosity from strangers always came with strings attached. That was what experience had taught her. Yet there was no guile in Yates Vaughn's expression, just the same straightforward honesty he had shown on the platform. "Why did you really bid on me?" she asked, deciding directness might serve her better than suspicion. "And please do not tell me it is just about fair value. You could have hired someone for far less." Yates was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clip of hooves on packed earth. Finally, he spoke. "My sister, Clara, had a twisted foot from birth. People treated her like she was fragile, like she might break if you looked at her wrong. It made her furious." A slight smile touched his mouth, sad and fond. "She was the strongest person I ever knew. She could outride most men, could shoot better than anyone I have seen before or since. When I saw you on that platform, the way you held yourself despite everything, I saw that same strength. Nobody else was looking for it, but I recognized it." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You said was your sister." "Fever took her 2 years ago," Yates said quietly. "She was 24. I am sorry." He nodded acknowledgement but did not elaborate further. They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less awkward and more companionable. Eleanor found herself studying his profile, the straight line of his nose, the way the sun caught in his dark hair where it curled slightly at his collar. He was a handsome man. She could acknowledge that objectively, but more than that, there was something solid about him, dependable. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where a creek carved through the land. The main house was modest but well-maintained, built from local stone and timber with a wide porch across the front. Outbuildings included a barn, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a smokehouse. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is not much," Yates said, and Eleanor heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it is home." It looks sturdy, Eleanor said, which was true. Everything about the place suggested careful attention and honest work. And you have water, that is worth more than gold out here. Yates smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. Exactly what I thought when I bought the land. Come on, I will introduce you to the men and show you the house. He helped her down from the wagon, his hand spanning her waist briefly before releasing her. 3 men had emerged from the barn, clearly curious about the new arrival. They ranged in age from perhaps 19 to somewhere in his 40s, all wearing the uniform of working cowboys, worn denim, scuffed boots, and sweat-stained hats. "Boys, this is Miss Eleanor Miller," Yates announced. "She will be managing the house and cooking. You will treat her with respect or you will answer to me." "Understood," the men nodded, mumbling greetings. The youngest, a lanky kid with red hair, looked positively delighted at the prospect of home-cooked meals. The oldest, a grizzled man with a thick mustache, tipped his hat to Eleanor with old-fashioned courtesy. "Madam," he said, "name is Frank Turner. These 2 are my nephews, Robert and James. We are pleased to have you here. Yates's cooking has been trying to kill us for months." That drew chuckles from the group and even a rueful grin from Yates himself. Eleanor felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. This was manageable. She knew how to cook and keep house. She could do this work and do it well. "I look forward to proving myself," she said clearly. "Though I will need a day or 2 to learn where everything is kept and what everyone prefers." "Take whatever time you need," Yates said. He picked up her trunk. "Let me show you your room, then I will give you a tour of the kitchen." The house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Yates led her through a front room furnished simply with a table and chairs, a stone fireplace, and a few shelves holding books and practical items. A short hallway led to 3 doors. He opened the first. "This will be yours," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. The room was small but clean, containing a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window that looked out toward the creek. Someone had made an effort. The floor was swept. The bedding looked freshly laundered, and there was even a small vase on the dresser holding a bunch of wildflowers. "The flowers were Frank's idea," Yates admitted, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "He thought it would be welcoming." "It is," Eleanor said, touched by the gesture. She ran her fingers along the edge of the dresser. "Thank you, this is more than I expected." Yates lingered in the doorway, seeming unsure. "My room is at the end of the hall. The middle door is just storage. The men sleep in the bunkhouse. You do not have to worry about privacy." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his consideration. "May I have a few minutes to settle in?" "Of course." "Come out when you are ready, and I will show you the kitchen." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking, she realized, the adrenaline of the day finally catching up with her. She had been sold, that was the ugly truth of it, purchased like a piece of property. But Yates Vaughn did not treat her like property. He treated her like a person, like someone whose comfort mattered. She thought of what he had said about his sister, about seeing strength instead of weakness. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. Her father had loved her but pitied her. Teachers had been kind but doubtful. Potential suitors had vanished the moment they noticed her limp. Yates Vaughn had looked at her and seen something different. Eleanor stood and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch spread before her. She could make a life here, maybe. 1 year was not forever, but it was long enough to figure out her next step, to save the salary Yates promised. She could be practical about this, keep her head down, do her work, and protect her heart. But even as she thought it, she knew it was already too late for that last part. The kitchen turned out to be surprisingly well equipped, with a large cast iron stove, ample counter space, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Yates gave her a thorough tour, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the routine. The men ate breakfast at dawn, dinner at midday, and supper after the work was done for the evening, usually around 7. "We are not fancy," he said, "but we appreciate good food. Frank does most of the shopping in town, and we have chickens for eggs, a milk cow, and a kitchen garden that needs attention. I will leave the details to you." Eleanor surveyed the space, already planning menus in her head. This she could do with her eyes closed. Cooking had been her responsibility since her mother died when Eleanor was 12, and she had developed a reputation in Yerington for her bread and pies. "I will make breakfast tomorrow," she said. "What time do you rise?" 5 usually, "but do not push yourself on the first day." 5 is fine, Eleanor assured him. "I am an early riser." She spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the kitchen and pantry, taking inventory and familiarizing herself with the layout. The men gave her a wide berth, clearly wanting to avoid getting in the way, but she caught them sneaking curious glances whenever they thought she was not looking. Frank eventually ventured in to ask if she needed anything from town, and she gave him a short list of items that would expand her cooking options. That evening, she prepared a simple supper of fried ham, beans, and cornbread using what was available. It was nothing elaborate, but the men ate with enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. Robert, the middle nephew, declared it the best meal he had eaten in months, which earned him a swat from Frank. "Do not insult the boss," Frank said, but he was grinning. Yates took the teasing in stride. "I never claimed to be a good cook. That is why I hired help." After supper, the men retreated to the bunkhouse while Eleanor cleaned the kitchen. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when Yates appeared in the doorway. "You do not have to do that tonight," he said. "You have had a long day." "So have you," Eleanor pointed out, not pausing in her work. "And this is my job." He moved into the room, picking up a towel. "Then let me help." They worked in companionable silence, Eleanor washing while Yates dried and put away dishes. It felt strangely domestic, intimate in a way that made Eleanor hyper-aware of his proximity. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him properly, and he smelled of honest sweat, leather, and something else, something clean she could not quite name. "The men like you," Yates said eventually. "That was not a given. They have been skeptical about changes." "I have only been here a few hours," Eleanor said. "Give them time to find my flaws." "Is that what you think? That people are just looking for flaws?" Eleanor paused, her hands stilling in the water. "In my experience, yes. People see my leg first, everything else second." Yates set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, his eyes looked darker, more intense. "Then they are fools. Your leg is just a part of you, like your brown hair or your stubbornness." "I am not stubborn," Eleanor protested, but she felt her lips twitch with the urge to smile. "You stood on that platform today like a queen at court," Yates said quietly. "That takes stubbornness, the good kind." "It takes courage." Eleanor's breath caught. They were standing too close, she realized, close enough that she could see the faint scar on his chin, the exact color of his eyes in lamplight. Close enough to feel dangerous. She stepped back, returning her attention to the dishes. "Thank you for the compliment, but I should finish here and get some rest." If Yates noticed her retreat, he did not comment on it. He simply resumed drying, and they finished the work in silence. When the last dish was put away, he bid her good night and disappeared down the hall to his own room. Eleanor lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling of her small room and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of settling wood, the whisper of wind through sage. She thought about Yates Vaughn's hands on her waist as he helped her down from the wagon, The way he matched his pace to hers without making her feel slow, the intensity in his eyes when he told her she was strong. This was dangerous territory, she knew. He was her employer, and she was bound to him by contract. More than that, she had learned not to trust kindness that seemed too good to be true. Men did not see past her limp to the woman beneath. That was just reality. Whatever she thought she saw in Yates Vaughn's eyes was probably wishful thinking, her lonely heart reaching for something that was not really there. But when she finally drifted to sleep, she dreamed of green eyes and calloused hands, of a man who saw strength where everyone else saw weakness. Eleanor woke before dawn, as was her habit, and dressed quickly in the dim light. Her leg always ached more in the mornings, stiff from sleep, and she moved carefully as she made her way to the kitchen. The house was silent, but she could hear movement from the direction of the barn, the men starting their day. She built up the fire in the stove and set about making breakfast. Biscuits, bacon, eggs from the henhouse, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time the sky began to lighten, the kitchen was filled with good smells, and Eleanor felt the satisfaction of work done well. The men arrived in a group, stamping dirt from their boots on the porch and entering with the careful courtesy of cowboys unused to having a woman around. They settled at the long table, and Eleanor served them with efficient grace, ignoring the way her leg protested the constant movement. Yates was last to arrive, his hair still damp from washing up. His eyes found Eleanor immediately, a question in them, and she gave him a small nod to indicate she was fine. She saw him relax slightly as he took his seat. Breakfast was a noisy affair, the men talking about the day's work, which fences needed mending, which cattle needed moving. Eleanor listened as she ate her own smaller portion, learning the rhythm of the ranch. When the meal ended, the men thanked her profusely and headed out, leaving her alone with Yates. "You are limping more than yesterday," he observed, his tone careful. "Is the work too much?" Eleanor bristled instinctively at the implication. "I am fine. My leg is always stiff in the morning. It will loosen up." "I am not criticizing," Yates said quickly. "I just want to make sure you are not pushing yourself too hard." "This is my job," Eleanor reminded him, more sharply than she intended. "You hired me to work, so let me work. I do not need special treatment." Something flickered in Yates's expression, hurt maybe, but he nodded. "Understood. I will be out with the men if you need anything." After he left, Eleanor felt a pang of regret for her harsh tone. He had only been showing concern, the same considerate kindness he had shown since the moment he bid on her contract. But she could not afford to be seen as fragile or incapable, not here, not when she was already starting from a position of disadvantage. She threw herself into work, cleaning the house from top to bottom, tending the kitchen garden, planning meals. By midday, when she rang the bell for dinner, she had proved to herself, if no one else, that she could handle everything required of her. The days developed a rhythm. Eleanor rose before dawn, cooked 3 meals a day, kept the house spotless, and tended to the endless small tasks that made a household run smoothly. The men treated her with unfailing courtesy, and even pitched in occasionally with the heavier work without being asked. Frank proved to be an excellent shopping companion, never questioning her requests and always finding exactly what she needed in town. Yates remained polite but distant, clearly respecting the boundaries Eleanor had established. They spoke at meals, discussing practical matters like provisions and schedules, but the easy warmth from that first evening in the kitchen did not return. Eleanor told herself this was better, safer, but she could not quite make herself believe it. 2 weeks into her tenure at the ranch, Eleanor was kneading bread dough when she heard a commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of horses moving fast. She wiped her hands and moved to the window, peering out to see Yates and the men riding in hard, something slung across Yates's saddle. Her heart lurched. She hurried outside as best she could, her uneven gait making the packed earth of the yard treacherous. By the time she reached the group, Yates was dismounting carefully, supporting a figure she now recognized as James, Frank's younger nephew. "What happened?" Eleanor demanded. "Horse threw him," Yates said tersely. "Landed hard. He is conscious, but his arm is broken for sure, maybe ribs too." "Bring him into the house," Eleanor ordered, shifting immediately into crisis mode. "Put him in my bed, it is closer. Frank, ride for the doctor in town. Robert, I need hot water and clean cloth." Everyone moved to obey without question. Yates carried James into Eleanor's small room and laid him gently on the bed. The young man was pale and sweating, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. Eleanor had seen enough injuries growing up in a rough town to know what needed to be done. "This is going to hurt," she told James matter-of-factly, "but we need to stabilize that arm until the doctor arrives. Yates, hold his shoulders. Robert, when you get back with that water, I will need you to hold his legs." For the next hour, Eleanor worked with calm efficiency. She cleaned and splinted James's arm as best she could, checked him for other injuries, and got some willow bark tea into him for the pain. Yates stayed at her side the entire time, following her instructions without hesitation, his strong hands gentle when they needed to be. When the doctor finally arrived, he examined Eleanor's work and nodded approval. "You have done well, miss. Not much more I can do except set the bone properly and wrap those ribs. He will be laid up for a few weeks, but he should recover fully." Eleanor sagged with relief. She had not realized how tense she was until the doctor's reassurance released it. She became aware that Yates was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. After the doctor left, with James resting comfortably under the influence of laudanum, Eleanor returned to the kitchen. Her bread dough had overproofed, but she punched it down and set it to rise again, needing the familiar motions to settle her nerves. "That was impressive," Yates said from the doorway. Eleanor jumped, not having heard him approach. "It was just practical knowledge. Anyone could have done it." "No," Yates said, moving into the room. "Not anyone. You stayed calm, knew exactly what to do, and probably saved James a lot of additional suffering. Frank wants me to thank you. He is too emotional to do it himself right now." "James is a good kid," Eleanor said, focusing on her dough. "I am glad I could help, Eleanor." Yates's voice was soft but insistent. She looked up to find him standing much closer than she expected. "You do not have to deflect every compliment. You do not have to prove yourself constantly. We see your worth, I see it. Do you?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. "Or do you just see your sister when you look at me?" Yates went very still. "Is that what you think?" "I do not know what to think," Eleanor admitted. "You paid $200 for my contract when you could have gotten workers for a fraction of that. You treat me with more consideration than anyone has in years. You look at me like I am not broken, and I do not understand why." "You are not broken," Yates said fiercely. "Having a limp does not make you broken any more than having brown eyes or a talent for cooking does. It is just part of who you are. And yes, seeing you on that platform reminded me of Clara, reminded me of watching people underestimate her over and over. But you are not my sister, Eleanor." "I know that." "Then what am I to you?" Eleanor asked, her heart pounding. Yates reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You are the woman who makes this house feel like a home, who handles crises without falling apart, who stands up to me when I overstep, who makes the best biscuits I have ever tasted. You are Eleanor, and that is more than enough." Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every logical reason not to. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I have been disappointed so many times." "I know," Yates said. "I am afraid too. I have not felt this way about anyone since before Clara died, since before I stopped letting people close. But there is something about you, Eleanor, something that makes me want to take the risk." She opened her eyes and found him watching her with such open honesty that it stole her breath. "We should be practical about this. I am contracted to work for you for a year. Getting involved would complicate everything." "It would," Yates agreed. He had not moved his hand from her face. "But I think we are already involved, whether we act on it or not. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to come back to the house during the day. I lie awake at night knowing you are just down the hall, so we can ignore this, or we can be honest about it." Eleanor knew what the sensible choice was, what her father would have counseled if he were still alive. But standing in this kitchen with Yates's hand gentle against her skin and his eyes full of something that looked like hope, she did not feel particularly sensible. "If we do this," she said carefully, "we do it honestly. No games, no pretending. And if it does not work, we figure out how to manage the rest of my contract like adults." "Agreed, agreed," Yates said, and then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, questioning, his lips soft against hers. Eleanor responded tentatively, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding under her palms as fast as her own. When he deepened the kiss, she let him, opening to him, tasting coffee and something sweet. They pulled apart slowly, both breathing hard. Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you." "On the auction platform?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "You looked so fierce," Yates said. "So determined not to let them break you. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Eleanor laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "I looked terrified." "You look strong," Yates corrected. "There is a difference." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms in the middle of the kitchen. Outside, Eleanor could hear the ranch continuing its daily rhythm, cattle, chickens, the distant voices of Frank and Robert. But in here, in this small bubble of space, it was just the two of them. Finally, reluctantly, Eleanor stepped back. "I need to check on James, and you have work to do." "I do," Yates agreed, but he caught her hand before she could move away completely. "Eleanor, this is not just convenient for me. I need you to know that. This is real." "I believe you," Eleanor said, and realized she meant it. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the dynamic of the ranch. Eleanor and Yates were careful not to be obvious about their growing relationship, mindful of propriety and the men's comfort, but there were small signs. The way Yates's hand would linger on her back when he passed her in the hallway. The way Eleanor would save the best portions of meals for him. The way they would find excuses to be alone together, talking late into the evening after everyone else had gone to bed. James recovered slowly under Eleanor's attentive care. The young man clearly embarrassed to be causing extra work but grateful for her kindness. Frank and Robert seemed to sense the change between Yates and Eleanor, but had the good grace not to comment, though Eleanor caught them exchanging knowing looks more than once. It was nearly a month after the incident with James when Frank approached Eleanor while she was hanging laundry. "Miss Eleanor, can I speak with you a moment?" "Of course, Frank," Eleanor said, pinning a sheet to the line. "What is on your mind?" The older man removed his hat, turning it in his hands nervously. "I do not mean to overstep, but I have noticed you and the boss seem close." Eleanor felt her cheeks heat. "Frank, he held up a hand. "I am not judging, miss. Truth is, it is about time Yates found someone. He has been alone too long and you are good for him. The boys and we just want you to know we approve if that matters." "It matters a great deal," Eleanor said softly. touched by his concern. "Thank you, Frank. He is a good man," Frank continued. "Best boss I ever worked for, and I have worked for plenty. Lost his sister hard, lost his parents before that. Ranch is all he has had for a long while. But since you came," he smiles again. "That is worth something." After Frank left, Eleanor stood among the flapping sheets and let herself imagine a future she had not dared to consider before. What would it be like to stay here beyond her contracted year? To make this place truly home? To build a life with Yates? That evening, after supper was cleared and the men had retired, Yates found Eleanor on the front porch. She was sitting on the steps, looking out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I was hoping you would," Eleanor admitted. He sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. They were quiet for a while, comfortable in the silence. Finally, Yates spoke. "Frank talked to you today." "He did," Eleanor confirmed. "He wanted me to know he approves of us." "The men have been giving me knowing looks for weeks," Yates said with a slight smile. "Apparently we are not as subtle as we think. Does it bother you that they know?" "No," Yates said firmly. "Eleanor, I am not trying to hide this. You are not something I am ashamed of. If anything, I want everyone to know you chose me." Eleanor turned to look at him in the fading light. "I think it is more like we chose each other." "Even better," Yates said. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know it has only been a few weeks since we talked about this, but I need you to know something. This is not temporary for me. I am not passing time until your contract is up. I am in this fully, for as long as you will have me." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "Yates, I care about you more than I thought possible in such a short time, but I need to know this is real for you, that you are not just trying to save me like you could not save Clara." "You do not need saving," Yates said. "That is the point, Eleanor. Clara needed protecting from a world that would not accept her. But you are already strong. You survived loss and humiliation and came out the other side with your spine straight and your dignity intact. I am not trying to save you. I am trying to convince you to build something with me." "Build what?" Eleanor asked, hardly daring to hope. "A life," Yates said simply. "A partnership. A future. I know we are supposed to be practical, to think about contracts and propriety, but I cannot be practical about you. I am falling in love with you, Eleanor Miller, and I think you might be falling too." Eleanor's breath caught. "I am," she admitted. "Falling, I mean. I have been fighting it because it seemed impossible, but I am falling in love with you, Yates Vaughn." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Yates wrapped an arm around her. "Now we take it one day at a time. I court you properly, even if you do live in my house. We let this grow naturally, and when your contract is up, I ask you to stay, not as an employee but as my wife, if you want that." "I think I might," Eleanor said softly. "I think I might want that very much." They sat together as full darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Nevada sky. For the first time since her father died, Eleanor felt truly at peace. She had found more than employment at the Vaughn Ranch. She had found home. The summer deepened, bringing with it the intense heat typical of Nevada in August. Eleanor settled into the rhythm of ranch life as though she had been born to it. Her initial wariness faded, replaced by genuine affection for the place and the people. Frank and his nephews treated her like family, often bringing her wildflowers they found on the range or helping with heavier tasks without being asked. James, fully recovered from his injury, was especially devoted, insisting she had saved his life, though Eleanor maintained she had only done what anyone would have done. But it was her relationship with Yates that truly flourished. He courted her with an old-fashioned persistence that made her heart flutter, bringing her small gifts from town, reading to her in the evenings from his small collection of books, teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses despite her concerns about her leg. He never pushed her faster than she was ready to go, but his intentions were clear in every gesture, every word. One evening in late August, Yates asked Eleanor to take a walk with him after supper. They strolled toward the creek, the air finally cooling after another blistering day. The water ran shallow this time of year, but it still provided a green ribbon of life through the brown landscape. "I have been thinking," Yates said as they walked, his hand holding hers. "Your contract is up at the end of June next year. That is 10 months away." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. They had not discussed the contract explicitly since that conversation on the porch weeks ago, but it hung between them, a deadline neither wanted to face. "I do not want to wait 10 months to ask you properly," Yates said. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eleanor, I know this is fast. I know people will talk, but I also know my own heart, and I know that what I feel for you is not going to change. If anything, I fall more in love with you every day." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I know you need time to be sure to trust this, but I want you to know my intentions. I want to marry you, Eleanor. I want to tear up that contract and make you my wife, my partner in everything. I want to build this ranch with you, grow old with you, have a family with you if that is something you want. I want everything." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "I never thought anyone would want those things with me. I thought my leg meant I would always be second choice, the practical option if nothing better came along." "You are not second choice," Yates said fiercely. "You are first choice, only choice. Your leg is not a flaw, Eleanor. It is just part of the woman I love." "I love you too," Eleanor said, the words coming easily now. "And yes, I want all of those things. A family, a future, building something together. I want it all with you." "Then marry me," Yates said. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Let me make this official. Let me show everyone that you chose me just as much as I chose you." "Yes," Eleanor said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Vaughn." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests about her balance, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Eleanor felt the last of her protective walls crumble. This was real. This was forever. They decided to marry in October, giving them time to make proper arrangements but not waiting unnecessarily. Eleanor wrote to her father's sister in California, a woman she barely knew but who was her only remaining family, to share the news. The response came 3 weeks later, a warm letter expressing delight and including a family ring that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother. Yates rode into Yerington to make arrangements with the circuit preacher and to file the papers that would formally dissolve Eleanor's work contract. When he returned, he presented her with a dress length of beautiful blue fabric. "For your wedding dress," he said, suddenly shy. "The shopkeeper said it matches your eyes." Eleanor held the fabric, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. "Yates, this must have cost a fortune." "You are worth a fortune," he said simply. "You are worth everything." In the evenings, Eleanor worked on her dress with careful stitches while Yates read aloud or simply sat near her, content in her presence. They talked about their plans for the future, how they might expand the ranch, whether they wanted children right away or should wait a few years. Yates admitted he hoped for several children eventually, wanting to create the large, boisterous family he had never had growing up. "What about you?" he asked. "Do you want children?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I always assumed I would not have the chance," she admitted. "But yes, I do. I want to raise children here, teach them to be strong and kind, to judge people by their character rather than their circumstances. They will be lucky to have you as a mother," Yates said warmly. As their wedding date approached, excitement built not just between Eleanor and Yates, but among the ranch hands as well. Frank insisted on contributing to the wedding feast, using his savings to purchase special items from town. Robert and James spent their spare time sprucing up the ranch, repairing anything that looked shabby, touching up paint, even building new shutters for the house windows. The night before the wedding, Eleanor stood in her small room, her finished dress hanging on the wall. It had turned out beautifully, the blue fabric draping elegantly, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she had painstakingly added. She could hardly believe that tomorrow she would put it on and become Eleanor Vaughn. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Frank or one of the nephews. Instead, Yates stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I know it is bad luck to see you before the wedding, but I could not sleep. I wanted to make sure you are certain about this." Eleanor smiled and moved toward him. "I am certain. Are you having second thoughts?" "Never," Yates said immediately. He took both her hands. "I just want you to know that tomorrow when we say those vows, I mean every word. For better or worse, sickness and health, all of it. This is forever for me, Eleanor." "It is forever for me too," Eleanor assured him. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. "You gave me back something I thought I had lost, Yates. You gave me hope, belief in my own worth, the courage to reach for happiness. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." "You do not owe me gratitude," Yates said softly. "You owe me nothing. Everything you have given me has been freely offered, and that makes it all the more precious." They stood together in the quiet room, holding each other, until finally Yates reluctantly pulled away. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow is a big day." "Tomorrow is the first day of everything," Eleanor agreed. The wedding took place in the afternoon when the worst of the day's heat had passed. The circuit preacher arrived promptly, a kindly older man who seemed genuinely pleased to be officiating a love match, rather than the marriage of convenience he likely expected. Frank and his nephews dressed in their Sunday best, looking both proud and uncomfortable in the formal clothes. Eleanor walked from the house to the small clearing by the creek where they had decided to hold the ceremony. She had no father to give her away, but she did not need one. She walked on her own, her head high, her steps as even as she could make them. Yates waited for her beneath a simple arch that Robert and James had constructed from cottonwood branches. When she reached him, the look in his eyes made her breath catch. He was wearing a proper suit, his hair neatly combed, but it was his expression that transformed him from handsome to breathtaking. He looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, their voices clear and steady, then added promises of their own. Yates vowed to honor her strength and support her dreams. Eleanor vowed to stand beside him through whatever challenges came, to build a life of love and laughter. When the preacher finally declared them married, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. The celebration afterward was joyous and loud. Frank had indeed outdone himself with the food, and someone had even procured a bottle of decent whiskey for toasts. The men took turns offering congratulations and good-natured advice. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Yates pulled Eleanor into a dance to music only they could hear. "Happy, Mrs. Vaughn," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Vaughn," Eleanor replied. That night, in the room that was now officially theirs, a larger room Yates had been quietly preparing for weeks, they came together as husband and wife. Yates was gentle and patient, mindful of Eleanor's nervousness, taking his time to show her with touch and whispered words how much he loved her. When Eleanor finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. The first months of their marriage were blissful. Eleanor took to her role as the ranch owner's wife with the same determination she had brought to her work as an employee. But now everything felt different because she was building something that belonged to her. She expanded the kitchen garden, started keeping better records of the household accounts, and even began raising chickens for sale in town, creating a small but steady additional income stream. Yates consulted her on every major decision regarding the ranch, treating her as the true partner he had promised she would be. When they disagreed, which happened occasionally, they worked through it with honest discussion rather than anger. Eleanor learned that Yates could be stubborn about his methods, but he would always listen to reason. Yates learned that Eleanor had a head for business that complemented his practical ranching knowledge. By Christmas, Eleanor suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Yates, wanting to give him the news as a gift. On a cold January evening, as they sat together by the fire, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone else who will be calling this place home," she said softly. Yates's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Eleanor, are you saying we are going to have a baby?" Eleanor confirmed, smiling at his stunned expression. "Sometime in late summer, I think." Yates let out a whoop of joy that brought Frank and the nephews running from the bunkhouse, concerned something was wrong. When Yates announced the news, the men's concerns transformed to congratulations. Frank looked particularly emotional, clapping Yates on the back and then carefully hugging Eleanor. "A baby at the ranch," he said, his voice gruff. "That is going to be something special." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor continued her work around the ranch, though Yates and the men insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. She found herself napping more in the afternoons and craving strange combinations of food that made everyone laugh. Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, though Eleanor firmly reminded him she was pregnant, not fragile. "I know," Yates said, chastened after Eleanor snapped at him for trying to carry a basket of eggs that she was perfectly capable of managing. "I just worry. I want everything to be perfect." "Nothing is ever perfect," Eleanor said more gently, "but we will handle whatever comes just like we always do, together." As summer approached, Eleanor grew round-bellied and uncomfortable in the heat. Yates brought a doctor from Yerington to check on her, wanting to ensure everything was progressing as it should. The doctor pronounced both mother and baby healthy and gave Eleanor instructions for when her time came. "You have got a strong one here," the doctor told Yates. "She will do just fine." In late August, on a night when the heat finally broke and a cool breeze blew down from the mountains, Eleanor went into labor. Yates sent Robert racing to town for the doctor while he stayed with Eleanor, holding her hand and trying not to show how terrified he was. Frank and James kept themselves busy boiling water and gathering clean cloths, following the instructions Eleanor had made them memorize weeks ago in case this happened. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had known her twisted leg might complicate things, though the doctor had assured her many women with similar conditions delivered healthy babies. Still, as the hours stretched and the pain intensified, she found herself gripping Yates's hand hard enough to leave marks. "You are doing so well," Yates kept saying, his voice steady even though his face was pale. "So strong, just like always. I love you so much, Eleanor." "Love you too," Eleanor gasped between contractions. "Even though you did this to me." That startled a laugh from Yates, which helped ease some of the tension in the room. The doctor arrived just as dawn was breaking, taking charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. Within another hour, Eleanor gave a final push, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Eleanor looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. Yates, standing beside the bed, reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fist. "We made that," he said in wonder. "Eleanor, we made a person." "We did," Eleanor agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on the right choice. Now, looking at his son, Yates said quietly, "What about Thomas? It was my father's name." "Thomas Vaughn," Eleanor tested the name. "I like it, Thomas it is." Frank and the nephews were allowed in to meet the newest member of the ranch family, each man taking his turn holding the baby with exaggerated care. Frank looked particularly moved, admitting later that Thomas reminded him of his own sons at that age, grown men now and scattered across the territory. The first weeks with Thomas were exhausting but wonderful. Eleanor recovered well from the birth, though she was more tired than she expected. Yates proved to be a devoted father, taking night shifts with the baby so Eleanor could sleep, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Watching her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny son, singing off-key lullabies, Eleanor fell even more deeply in love. As Thomas grew from newborn to infant, the ranch thrived. They had a good year, the cattle bringing fair prices, no major disasters befalling them. Yates hired 2 additional hands to help manage the expanding herd, young men who quickly learned that Eleanor was as much in charge as her husband. She kept the books, managed the household accounts, and was not afraid to offer opinions on ranch operations. The men respected her for it. When Thomas was 6 months old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock but no less joyful. Yates immediately began planning for how they would manage 2 small children, talking about expanding the house, adding more rooms. "We might end up with a whole brood," Eleanor teased. "Are you sure you are ready for that?" "I would take a dozen children if they are all like Thomas," Yates declared, making Eleanor laugh. "Let us see how we manage 2 before we start planning for a dozen." Their daughter, Clara, named for Yates's beloved sister, was born in early spring the following year. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and Clara emerged with a shock of dark hair and her father's green eyes. Thomas, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly under careful supervision. With 2 small children, life on the ranch became more chaotic but also more full. Eleanor learned to manage her household tasks while keeping one eye on Thomas's adventures and the other on Clara's feeding schedule. Yates was a hands-on father, often returning from the range to find Thomas perched on his shoulders and Clara snug against his chest in a sling Eleanor had fashioned. "You are a natural at this," Eleanor told him one evening as she watched him rock Clara to sleep while helping Thomas build a tower from wooden blocks. "I have a good teacher," Yates replied, smiling at her over their children's heads. "You make it all look easy." "It is not easy," Eleanor said honestly, "but it is good. This life we built, it is everything I wanted and more." As the years passed, the Vaughn Ranch continued to prosper. They added more cattle, purchased adjacent land when it became available, and built a solid reputation in Yerington and beyond. Eleanor became known not just as Yates's wife, but as a capable businesswoman in her own right, respected for her fair dealings and sharp mind. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's serious nature, and his mother's determination. Clara was a whirlwind of energy, fearless and bright. When Thomas was 5 and Clara 3, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, who kept the entire household in constant motion. Yates hired more help, both for the ranch and to assist Eleanor with the children, though she remained firmly in charge of her household. The memory of that day on the auction platform seemed like a lifetime ago now. Sometimes Eleanor would catch sight of herself in the mirror, older now, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her hair, and marvel at how much had changed. She still limped. Her leg had not miraculously healed, but it no longer defined her. She was Yates's wife, mother to 4 children, a successful ranch owner and a valued member of the community. One evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Yates sat together on the porch as they often did. It had become their time to reconnect after the busy day, to simply be husband and wife rather than parents and ranchers. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Bidding so much for my contract that day." Yates turned to look at her, genuine surprise on his face. "Regret? Eleanor, that was the best $200 I ever spent. It brought me you." "But you could have had anyone," Eleanor persisted. "Someone without a limp, someone from a good family, someone—" "Stop," Yates interrupted gently but firmly. He took her hand. "I do not want anyone else. I never have. I wanted you, Eleanor, the woman who stood on that platform with her head high and fire in her eyes, the woman who saw strength in herself when everyone else saw weakness. That is who I fell in love with, and that is who I love more with each passing day." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "I love you too, so much. You gave me everything, Yates." "No," Yates corrected, pulling her close. "We gave each other everything. That is what makes it matter." They sat together under the stars, the same stars that had watched them navigate from employer and employee to husband and wife, from 2 separate people to partners building something lasting. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch they had built together thrived. Eleanor thought about that girl on the auction platform, terrified but determined not to show it, certain her future held nothing but more disappointment. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, that the cowboy bidding $200 would see her, truly see her, and love what he found. That he would give her not just a job but a home, not just security but a family, not just acceptance but deep and abiding love. But perhaps it was better that she had not known. The journey from that platform to this porch had taught her things about herself she needed to learn, about her own strength and resilience, about her capacity to love and be loved. Every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary. Years continued to pass in the way they do in a well-lived life, marked by small joys and occasional sorrows, by children growing and the ranch expanding, by love deepening into something unshakable. Thomas eventually took over many of the ranch operations, proving to have his father's skill with cattle and his mother's business sense. Clara married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her as an equal partner. Samuel and Daniel, inseparable as they had been since birth, decided to try their fortune in California but returned within 2 years, admitting there was no place like home. Eleanor and Yates grew old together, their hair silver, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent working under the Nevada sun. Eleanor's limp grew more pronounced with age, arthritis settling into the old injury. But Yates was always there with a supporting arm, matching his pace to hers just as he had from that very first day. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the chaos of family spread across the yard, and felt Yates's arm come around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. That I am the luckiest woman alive, Eleanor said simply. That every hard thing I went through was worth it to get here. I am the lucky one, Yates insisted. You took a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense. You took a chance on a woman everyone else overlooked, Eleanor countered. I did not overlook you, Yates said seriously. I saw you, really saw you from the first moment. I saw strength, courage, dignity, everything beautiful and true. I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with, and I have never regretted that vision for a single second. Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the face she knew as well as her own. I love you, Yates Vaughn. I love you, Eleanor Vaughn, he replied, and kissed her there on the porch while their grandchildren played and the sun set over the land they had built together. That night, after the celebration ended and the house finally quieted, Eleanor lay in bed beside her husband of 30 years. They had started with nothing but hope and determination. They had faced challenges, drought years and cattle sickness, the death of friends and the grief that comes with living a full life. But they had faced it all together, two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. Eleanor thought about that auction platform one final time, allowing herself to remember the fear and humiliation, the certainty that her life would be small and constrained. She thought about the moment Yates's voice had rung out, confident and sure, bidding an amount that shocked everyone. He had not been bidding on damaged goods or a convenient housekeeper. He had been bidding on a future, on partnership and love, on everything they would build together. He had looked past the surface to see who she truly was, and in doing so, he had given her the courage to see it herself. Thank you, Eleanor whispered into the darkness. For what? Yates murmured sleepily beside her. For seeing strength instead of weakness, Eleanor said. For choosing me. Yates pulled her closer, his arms secure around her. Always love, always. As Eleanor drifted to sleep, she knew their story would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch that bore their name and the love they had cultivated as carefully as any crop. She had been auctioned because of her limp, true, but that was just the beginning of the story. The rest, the important parts, had been written in partnership with a man who saw her true value. That cowboy on the platform had not been offering charity or pity. He had been offering the chance at something real, and Eleanor had been brave enough to take it. Together they had created a life full of love, laughter, hard work, and profound satisfaction. They had built a family and a legacy that would outlast them both. It was, Eleanor thought as sleep finally claimed her, the best ending she could have imagined. Or rather, it was not an ending at all, but a continuation of everything they had started that day in Yerington when one man looked past what everyone else saw as a flaw and recognized it for what it truly was, just one small part of a remarkable woman. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of Vaughns, a testament to what two people can build when they see each other clearly and love without reservation. And if you visit on a quiet evening, locals will tell you that sometimes you can still catch a glimpse of two figures on the porch, an old cowboy and the woman he chose, sitting together under the stars, exactly where they belong.